All right, we're ready to get started. We'll call this meeting to order. To start, let's please start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Eva, could we get a roll call?
Board Member Bianchi?
Here.
Board Member Fay?
Present.
Board Member Gage?
Present.
Board Member Johnson?
Present.
Board Member Simon?
Present.
Chairman Munt?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Eva. All right, this is a public hearing, non-consent. Non-consent public hearing items will be heard at an individual public hearing and will be acted upon by the commission or board by a separate motion. During the public hearings, anyone wishing to comment in support or in opposition to a public hearing item may do so. If you wish to comment on a public hearing item, you must fill out a public comment card, including the item number in which you wish to be heard. Once the hearing is closed, there will be no further public comment unless requested by a member of the commission or board. So the comment cards are in back. Given that there's one item on the agenda, I don't believe there will be a significant amount, but if there are anyone, please get those comment cards in. All right, we will move on. Item number 2. AP 23-02 Valor Christian Center, and I believe we have a presentation. Take it away.
Thank you, Board. I am Samantha Novotny, Planner 1. Okay. This is AP 23-02 Valor Christian Center, an appeal of the zoning hearing officer decision appealing to the Board of Adjustment. Whoop. Clicker. One moment. Okay, there we go. This is a slide of the appeal summary. The applicant is appealing to the Board of Adjustment of the zoning hearing officer's denial decision regarding a variance request, V22-07, to increase dimensions of one monument sign at Valor Christian Center, address 3015 East Warner Road. Here are some aerials of the site. On the left, you can see Higley is to the east, Warner to the north, Claiborne Avenue to the west, and the right aerial just zooms in on the property a little bit further, and that arrow with the label points out to the one existing monument sign, just to orient you at the site. This slide is a summary of the variance request on March 8th. That was when the zoning hearing officer heard the case. March 16th is when the hearing officer issued their decision and findings in a letter. They have 10 days to deliberate, which is why there's a difference between the hearing date and the decision date. The bullets just point out a couple pertinent questions that the hearing officer asked of staff. One of them was, do any of the 9 researched properties enjoy signage rights greater than was permitted by their zoning district? Staff answered no, and followed up on that research that's incorporated in the staff report that you have before you for the appeal. A second question was, are there any other non-residential uses in the residential area surrounding the property? And what are their signage rights? And to answer that bullet, I have some notes here. Any other non-residential uses surrounding the property are zoned differently, either in commercial or institutional, so their signage rights are different. And if there are any home-based businesses in any of the residential adjacent neighborhoods, they are not allowed any signage at all. So we wouldn't be able to tell if there is in fact a non-residential use in the residential zoning districts adjacent to the property. Okay, this slide summarizes the original variance request. Their current allowance in height is 8 feet, and in the original request, they wanted to increase it to 14 feet, the sign area from 32 square feet to 64, and the electronic messaging display from half the sign area to all of the sign area. And this is important because in the appeal, they request a couple conditions which modify that original request. And the following are conditions that the applicant is appealing with that denial decision. 1, a limit of a freestanding monument sign 12 feet in height and 60 square feet in sign area, which again is different from the original 14 and 64. A limit of only 1 freestanding monument sign as described above instead of the 3 additional monument signs currently allowed. And a limit that the freestanding monument sign described above would be located only along Warner Road. I have a couple photos here just giving some visual context of what each frontage looks like. This photo is from Warner Road looking southwest. And you can see the existing monument sign there. Looking southeast from Warner Road. And again, looking east from Warner Road. With a this is more recent than the previous 2 photos. These 2 were taken last March, whereas the previous 2 slides were a Google image capture noting July 2022. This slide talks about surrounding zoning. You can see in the red rectangle is single family 8. That's the property. To the east is commercial, various types of commercial. And then to the north, west, and south are also various types of single family residential. I have this slide here just showing to the first column is the code allowance, what the sign code allows. The existing sign, and what they are proposing tonight. So you can see that the number that is allowed through the code is based on linear frontage. They are allowed 4 monument signs at this point, 8 feet in height and 32 square feet in sign area, and only 1 side is counted. So although you may see signs with 2 sides, only 1 side is counted towards the 32 square feet. So their existing sign is 5 feet in height and 22 square feet in sign area. And then proposed, they would like to increase that to 12 feet in height, 60 square feet in sign area, and then all of that sign area would be for electronic messaging instead of half. This is a brief slide on the findings of fact found in LDC section 6.5.3. It's a lot, but we're going to go over each one, so I don't expect you to read all of that. Finding number 1, there are special circumstances applicable to the property. Staff finds that this finding has not been met. The building being set farther back was not a requirement or a land use encumbrance, but was a development choice according to the master site plan from their 2006 approval. The current signage is well under the code allowance, as I showed in the previous slide with the table. So staff believes that to capture passerby attention, staff recommends increasing that signage and maximizing the use of what's allowed in the sign code. Number 2, the special circumstances were not created by the current or previous owner or applicant. Staff also finds this is unmet. Again, the building being set farther back was a choice made based on the design review, and to obtain a larger sign, The applicant previously pursued a rezoning request, and this would have allowed larger signs, but there was a limitation discovered that was not satisfactory. It would put the square footage limit on their design approvals, which have been entitled through the current zoning and master plan approvals. So in exchanging one benefit from one zoning district to another, caused a conflict, but is not deemed a special circumstance. Number 3, the variance does not constitute a granting of special privileges. Staff researched records and found at least 9 other properties that are place of worship uses and in residential zoning. So we tried to find comparable properties. Each of those properties have records showing compliance with the land development code and no signage beyond the code allowance. So we find that the LDC is being applied evenly throughout the town. And this finding has not been met as well. Fourth finding, the variance will not be materially detrimental to persons residing or working in the vicinity. By not meeting the intent of the code, there will be an impact to those in the vicinity, and without a special circumstance, staff finds that granting the variance sets a precedence for the town, allowing the property to develop in a manner that is more commercial in nature, and this is in conflict with the intent of the single-family zoning district, and with specific LDC provisions that plan for non-residential uses in residential zoning. So again, I quickly show this slide just to show what is allowed, existing, and proposed. This is a rendering provided by the applicant just for visual reference only to show what the sign is envisioned to look like. They still need to go through a sign review to receive permits if, in fact, the variance is granted. For public input during the variance hearing, there were several members of the public with concerns over the electronic message display impacting the neighborhood and perhaps advertising for events beyond the duration of seasonal events. There was also concern that the large sign would be too distracting to motorists. And then for the appeal, staff received one phone call supporting the preferring to uphold the zoning hearing officer's decision. With that, I conclude with staff's recommendation, which is to uphold the denial decision of the zoning hearing officer in the variance case V22-07. If the zoning hearing officer's decision is overturned, staff just has one recommended condition, and that is to modify the standards. The variance only modifies the standards specifically identified. All other standards of the LDC must be met. I will take any questions if you have any for me.
All right, thank you, Samantha. Does anybody have questions for Samantha? Board Member Bianchi.
Thank you, Chairman. So Samantha, can you help me clarify? So how many signs are allowed in total? Is it 3 or 4?
Board Member Bianchi, the total allowed for this site based on their linear frontage is 4 monument signs.
Okay.
3 on Warner, 1 on Claiborne.
And all of those are 32 square feet in size?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And then, other than perhaps a freeway monument sign, is there any other sign size with what's proposed allowed in another zoning district or similar district? Or would this exceed what's allowed in other districts?
Board Member Bianchi, what is allowed in other zoning districts, commercial, industrial, institutional, the maximum is 60 square feet and 12 feet in height.
Okay, all right. And then I guess my curiosity is, and it kind of showed up in some of the photos, but how do we classify the church signs that are already on the site, either on the building or on the the Connex container that are already there. Do we count those as signage, or because of their largeness and size, or is that just basically an identification of the building?
Board Member Bianchi, the existing sign along the frontage, that's classified as a freestanding monument sign, and the signage on the buildings, those are classified as wall signs.
Okay, so those would be separate and not
Separate
counted.
calculations, yes, separate provisions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else? Either of the two board members online have anything they'd like to ask Samantha?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Samantha. Moving on, does the applicant have a presentation that they would like to give? Please just state your name and you may, is your mic on? Just hit the button if you could, please. Thank
There
you.
we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Eric Stanley. I'm an attorney with Provident Law representing the church, Valor Christian Center. With me here tonight is Pastor Scott Whitwam, who's the pastor of Valor Christian Center. I just want to make some brief remarks about our application, our appeal to the board, and then Pastor Scott's going to have just a couple of brief remarks as well. I want to focus my comments tonight on the standards for granting a variance, which is why we're here and why we've appealed, because respectfully, the church respectfully disagrees with the zoning hearing officer's decision and with the staff's recommendation and report, and we believe that the church does meet the requirements for a variance. And so I want to kind of outline why that's the case as we move forward. The Land Development Code provisions for the four provisions for granting a variance are in 6.5.3. Ms. Novotny put some of those up earlier. The first one is evidence showing why, due to the special circumstances applicable to the property, including its size, shape, topography, location, or surroundings, strict application of the zoning ordinance would deprive the property owner of privileges enjoyed by other property owners of the same classification in the same zoning district. And so this standard really focuses, and I want to focus my comments on this standard on the special circumstances that are applicable to this property are the location or surroundings of the property. I've put a variant or an aerial up on the overhead, the slide here shows the church and also Warner Road to the north, the general commercial to the east, and the neighborhood commercial to the northeast, and then surrounding on the west and the south sides are residential as well. But other properties are not in the same position as this particular church because they can use the smaller signage and be seen just fine. The special circumstances of the location and the surroundings of this church property deprive it of the same visibility and being noticed as other church properties in a residential zone. And I'll get to some of the other church properties in a residential zone in a few minutes, but it's important to note the church has been there for a long time. The building was built that you see that sits back from Warner Road. It sits closer to Claiborne. The building has been there since 2008. And at the time the church building was built, the Warner Road was a two-lane road. The speed limit ranged from 25 to 35. The town has literally kind of grown up around the church. The location and surroundings have changed since that time period. Warner Road is now divided, 6-lane highway or 6-lane road with a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit. So the surroundings of the property here were changed, not by the church. The church didn't do anything, and it's been the same since 2008, but by the town and the widening of the road and the town kind of growing up around the church, making it more difficult for the signs to be seen. So if you're going by at about 50 miles an hour plus, which some folks do. It's very, very difficult to see the very small monument sign that's low to the ground there. The church's approved site plan for the property was made at a time when the area was fields. It was mostly undeveloped, and the size of the monument sign allowed by the code could be seen by passing traffic. And I guess my point is that's all changed now. That's the special circumstances with this particular property, is that the location and the surroundings have changed. And it deprives the church of the same visibility and getting noticed as other churches in residential zones. So that's the first requirement of the variance. One of the other requirements is evidence that the special circumstances applicable to the property owner are not self-imposed by the current or previous property owner or applicant. And on this one, the church did not impose the special conditions that it has, the location and the surroundings of the property. As I mentioned, the church has literally done nothing to its property other than add a picnic ramada close to Warner Road since 2008. The town developed around the church, and the changes to the locations and surrounding of the church were not done by the church, so they weren't self-imposed. So that special condition that I talked about first, the special condition being the location and surroundings of the property, the church did not impose those special conditions on itself. It was just, as development happened, this is what took place. There is another point here about this not being self-imposed as well. The church's property is zoned SF8, and the church originally pursued a rezoning of the property to NC, neighborhood commercial. And in the process of that, learned that it would have to give up its entitlements and take a lower square footage development if it would go to NC than it currently had. And so the church said, well, that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, but staff was in favor of the rezone to NC, and it seemed that that would be a good move other than kind of the square footage differences. And the point that I want to make with that is literally nothing on the property would change with the rezoning other than the letters that you see. Instead of SF8, it would be NC. And if the church had done that, it could have had the sign that it asks for tonight. Because a 12-foot high sign, 60 square feet, is allowed in the neighborhood commercial zone. It's allowed in the GC zone. It's allowed in the public facility institutional zone. It's just not allowed in the SF8 zone. And so the church should not have to give up those development rights that it already has and its plan just in order to obtain a sign that it could have if it didn't change the property, but just change the zoning designation on the property. So the special circumstances under this requirement are not self-imposed when the owner wants to use the property in a way permitted to other similarly situated properties, but cannot do so because of externally imposed circumstances. And the externally imposed circumstances here are, one, the location and surroundings of the property, and two, the basically bargain, the give up that the church would have to have in order to have this sign. The third requirement for a variance is evidence showing that the requested variance will not constitute a grant of special privileges, inconsistent with limitations upon other properties in the vicinity and district in which the property is located. As you can see from the overhead, the aerial, the church property is essentially similar in size and frontage and characteristics to the property directly to the east, which is zone GC, general commercial. That GC property could have a sign, like the church is requesting, that would be located mere feet away from the church's property. So literally a couple of feet on the other side of that property line, the GC property could have an electronic changing message sign that's 12 feet high with 60 square feet, with the entire sign space used as an electronic changing message sign. There's no substantial differences between the church's property and this GC property, so there certainly would not be any special privileges inconsistent with other properties in the vicinity there. But as the staff report talked about, the staff researched other churches in residential zoning. So the staff report identified 9 churches in residential zones within the town and concluded that they contain no variances or signs that are larger than code regulations. But as I looked at them, that's because those properties are different than the property we're dealing with here. So pulling up some of these that are identified in the staff report, this is Two Rivers Church. They're on Guadalupe Road. It's the church property, the parcel is outlined in blue there. It's SF8 residential. So this church property is surrounded by residential and multifamily. So single family and multifamily that you can see. There's SFA, SF8, SF10, and multifamily medium density. So that's one of them. That is different. This Two Rivers Church does not border upon a commercial property like Valor Christian Center does. This is St. Anne Roman Catholic Parish on Elliott Road, which is another church identified in the staff report. Again, as you can see, this church parcel is completely surrounded, again, by residential zoning. So no bordering of any general commercial properties at all. The same with New Hope Community Church. As you can see, outlined in blue is the church property here. And again, all of these parcels surrounding the church on Guadalupe Road are residentially zoned parcels. This is Mission Community Church. This is probably the one that might be a little bit of the closest to Valor Christian Center and kind of how it looks. But this church is zoned residential. You can see to the west is multifamily medium density. To the north and the east are public facility institutional district. So those are your parks and your government buildings and things of that nature. And then down to the south is light industrial and business park and multifamily medium density. So this one might be the closest to it, but the rest of them, and I'll just go through these quickly, you can see this is Heritage Temple Free Will Baptist Church on Guadalupe Road. You can see it's surrounded by zoning, by residential zoning, other than directly to the west, which that PFI, the Public Facility Institutional, is a fire station. Gilbert Presbyterian Church is another church identified in the staff report. This is again surrounded again by residential zoning, really all the way around the church itself, no general commercial anywhere nearby. And then finally, this is Desert Gateway Baptist Church. And this church is zoned residential, and it also is surrounded by residential properties. Excuse me, I'll just point out the RU43 that you see to the south, that is a county property. It's not within the town, which is why it has a different zoning, but that is a Maricopa County residential zoning district. So going back to Valor Christian Center's property, you can see the difference between the two. Valor Christian Center's property is right next to this general commercial property. It is bordered by residentials on the other side, but it's right next to this, which is different than any of these other churches that were identified. And I think that's important because when you look at the properties and you see what the differences are, there will not be a grant of special privileges that are not given to these other 9 properties because those other 9 properties are different than what Valor Christian Center has here. And then the final factor I want to talk about is evidence showing why granting the variance will not be detrimental to the health, safety, and general welfare of persons living or working in the neighborhood and will not be detrimental to the general welfare of the town. I don't think there's a lot of serious disagreement here. I think what we've heard from staff is that, well, because it doesn't meet the code requirements, it's detrimental to the general welfare of the town. But we haven't heard anything specific about why that might be the case. So there's really been no evidence at all that the sign would be detrimental to the surrounding area or the neighborhoods. I will point out an electronic changing message sign is already allowed in this residential district. It is just on a much smaller scale that it would be very difficult to see. And so it's already allowed to have an electronic changing message sign here. The church will abide by the brightness level restriction in the code, which is no greater than 0.3 foot candles above ambient light at property line. Everybody has to abide by that, and so the church will abide by that too. The church has over 425 feet of frontage on Warner Road. The sign can be easily positioned and located so that it does not interfere with any of the surrounding residential uses. And then the fact, I think, that the general commercial property directly to the east could locate a sign exactly what the church is asking for here, could locate that sign mere feet away from the church's property, really takes care of any concerns about detrimental impact to the neighborhood or surrounding areas. If that property could have a sign just feet away from where the church wants to put its sign, then it's difficult to see how the church's sign that we're requesting would be detrimental here. We did hear from some of the neighbors in the zoning hearing officer hearing, and some of the neighbors were concerned about brightness and things of that nature. But again, I think those are easily taken care of with location, abiding by the code, and just an understanding of what this general area really is. So the church respectfully requests that our appeal be granted, that a variance be given for the sign under the conditions that we've requested. And Pastor Scott's just going to make some brief comments right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Pastor Scott, feel free to state your name and then continue with your
Thank you,
discussion.
Mr. Chair, and the board. We appreciate you giving us the opportunity. I'm Pastor Scott Whitwell. I'm the senior pastor at Valor Christian Center. And I think our attorney has done a fairly good job of laying out some of the issues at hand here. We started this process back with Mayor John Lewis many years ago. He's been gone now. We're 3 mayors into the cycle since him. So this has been a journey for us. We enjoy the ability to continue to work with the town of Gilbert. I mean, that's one of our missions, is in order to work with the town of Gilbert, we meet regularly with the incoming administrations, find out how we can better benefit the town. This was one of the things that we had brought up again many years ago under John Lewis, again with Mayor Jen Daniels, and obviously with Mayor Peterson, is that we want to be able to have a sign that can be seen, and we were advised by the town when they couldn't approve our sign because they said it was larger than what was allowed, to go through a zoning change to neighborhood commercial, which we went through the public hearings, the community input. We went through the hearings. We went through the zoning commission, and we seem to have no resistance. In fact, it seemed to be all good feedback about changing the property zoning to neighborhood commercial for one purpose, so that we could have a larger sign. So the property, I don't think the sign and the property are really the issue. It's about, how do we make that happen so that we can, have a sign to let the community know what we're doing, and yet try to work with the community and the town in order to make this as least impactful as we can. And so we're here today saying that we think that on the merits that the property qualifies, as the zoning commission had said, that if we'll change from single family to neighborhood commercial, we certainly can have a sign. But we don't see the benefit in giving up our future rights of development for that purpose. And so we do appreciate everything that the town has done with us and for us, our ability to work with veterans and youth and to try to be a positive impact on an incredible town. The town of Gilbert has many things to be proud of, and we want to be one of those many things. I will just note, when I was listening to Mr. Stanley's presentation, is that most of those churches that are in residential districts don't suffer from something that we suffer from, and that is the large vegetation that we are requested to have by the town in order to keep the look of the property in conformity with other commercial areas, through the taller vegetation, which even an 8-foot sign would be obstructed until you're right on it. And people driving by at 45 plus miles an hour down that road, they're by it. We've been doing events out on this property where we have our new picnic ramada for about 7 years. And time after time after time, people who stop in when we have all the banners and stuff out that attract their attention to come into the events we're doing, tell us time and time again, I've been driving by here for 5 years, 6 years. I never knew there was a church back there, because we have no way to communicate that message on Warner Road at this time. And that's really what we seek to do. And we're willing to work again with the new sign sizes that we've modified after talking with the town at the original hearing. We're willing to move and relocate it. Again, we want a workable solution that works for all parties here, and I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Pastor. All right, anyone on the board have questions for the applicant? Board Member Bianchi?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Mr. Stanley.
Yes.
I think it was kind of talked about, but my question is, as the applicant, why would the smaller sizes that are allowed by right not choose to be utilized?
So Pastor Scott talked about that a little bit,
Yeah.
But it is difficult with the vegetation that's out there. But the smaller signs are also difficult to see as you're going on the other side on Warner Road across the divided portion of it. It's pretty far away. And even just increasing the number of signs would make it difficult. We actually think that this is a better workable solution than kind of cluttering the property with a bunch of signs, to just limit us to one that's a higher and more visible so that it can be seen, as opposed to 4.
Okay. And then my second question, so would the proposed digital sign, could that be used by others or other events or businesses to kind of promote things on the church land? I know, I drive by there. I know there are fireworks businesses at certain times of the year and things like that.
Yeah, so the answer is no, that would not be used by anybody else. It would be used by the church. The fireworks that you mentioned is a benefit that the church itself does. It's not a secular business or anything like that.
Okay.
And the proceeds go to veterans. So it's a fundraising effort, similar to other things that the church does. But it would only be used for advertisements of church-related activities and events, that's all.
Okay.
No outside businesses or anything like that. And really, it doesn't make sense to do that, because what the church wants to do is tell people, hey, we're here, we're doing an event, we're doing this or that, we want to invite the community to be a part of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, anyone else?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Mr. Stanley, I'd like you to talk about the last point a little bit more, the not affecting. It seemed like what you said was that there's not much disagreement, and I think we're past that. I think at this point in the procedural, it's presumptively adverse to the neighbors. And the point that the general commercial next door could have it, frankly, strikes me as irrelevant. So, and I don't know that there's a lot of explanation necessary for why a bigger sign could adversely impact the neighbors. I think your position is that it doesn't, or that it won't. But it seemed to me like where we started from in your presentation, in the rest of the presentation, it seemed like you grabbed onto each of the points. This one, it seemed like you kind of said, hey, there's not really much disagreement, and presumptively, it's not a big deal. The neighbor could do it, so let's move on. If that's your entire argument, I think that probably skipped right over the top of it, and I want to give you a chance to seize on that one a little bit better.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. That's not my entire argument, and I think what I was trying to highlight by saying there's not a lot of disagreement on that point is, I don't think there's a lot of disagreement on that point between us as the applicant and the staff on the detriment. I think it is, as you mentioned, it's assumed that it might be detrimental to the neighborhood. But I think when you look at it, and this is what I was hoping, trying to highlight and really want to highlight here, as you look at the physical characteristics of this particular piece of property, this has, as I mentioned, 425 feet of frontage along Warner Road. There is a lot of space to locate an electronic changing message sign along Warner Road, along the church's frontage, in a way that does not impact the surrounding neighbors. Another point that I made that I want to highlight again is that the church could have an electronic changing message sign, a digital sign now in this area. It would just be limited to 8 feet high and 16 square feet of a changing message. That's it. And so it'd be very, very small. But the idea of the digital sign with the lighting that comes with the digital sign is already allowed as a non-residential use on a residentially zoned piece of property. And so the church could have that now on a smaller scale if it wanted to. And I think it just, as it scales up to what we're asking for, we think that there's sufficient space to be able to locate the sign in a way that would not impact the surrounding neighborhood. My point about the general commercial property to the west here is, you know, if the general commercial property wanted to go 5 feet away from the church's property line, it could have the exact same sign that we're asking for here. And just, you know, maybe 5 or 10 feet away, we're asking for the same size sign that they could have. And so my point there is it's difficult to understand why, you know, if there's that short amount of space between where signs like this could be located, how a general commercial sign would not be detrimental to the neighborhood, but ours would all of a sudden if it just is 10 feet away or something like that. So that was my point. But a lot of the testimony that we heard at the hearing before the zoning hearing officer from the neighbors, and there were a few, were related to the lights and, you know, shining into the neighborhood, those kinds of things. I did highlight, which is why, you know, the code does regulate the brightness of signs. It has to be measured from the property line using a candle foot meter. And so the church obviously would abide by that. And that would be the same if the church wanted to go ahead and have its own electronic messaging sign just on a very much smaller scale that's already currently allowed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We do have some public comments, but I actually also have a comment, and it's kind of in regards to the proximity argument. So would you then agree that the home that backs up to Warner Road that is to the, I think it would be the east, that is in the same zoning district, SF8, that they should be able to utilize that same argument and place a massive light-up sign in their backyard?
I don't think so, and here's the reason why. I think that the church's property, the way that it's located, is a bit of a transitional property from the general commercial to the east, to the neighborhoods to the west. And so it's appropriate, I think, for the church to have a sign in that kind of transitional area. But I think as you move, you know, into that property that's along Warner Road, obviously they don't have the same physical characteristics as the church's property, so it would be very difficult for them to locate a sign in a way that doesn't impact their neighbors, which are very, very close to them. But also they're not in a transitional kind of zone like this church is. That's initially why the church went for the neighborhood commercial. The whole reason was for the sign, but also it was just out of an understanding that it would be a nice transition from general commercial to the east to the residential to the west. So now I don't agree that property would have the ability to have the sign. And I think if you look at the factors for the variance, that property would have a very difficult time meeting those factors to understand why that property would have some special circumstances that their neighbors wouldn't have. And, you know, that it wouldn't be detrimental to their neighbors, which are very, very close to them.
Okay, thank you. And then a follow-up, when you were going through the rezoning, you stated that going to NC and SF8, that there's really no change to the property.
Correct.
So why didn't you do it?
Because the church has a current entitlement of a certain amount of square footage that it would be allowed to develop under its plan, and that has been approved by the town. If the church were to rezone to NC, that square footage that the church could develop would be drastically reduced. And so the church could not complete its plan that's already been approved. It would have to drastically reduce the amount of square footage under roof to something around, I think it's 42,000 square feet under roof in the NC zone. And so that's why it didn't get that's why the church basically saw it as kind of a Hobson's choice, or between a rock and a hard place. It's like, well, we could get the NC and get the sign, but we're going to give up our ability to phase in our development plan that's already been approved, and, you know, we'll have to go back to the drawing board and have much, much smaller buildings.
Right. Well, then wouldn't the same argument be that if you had rezoned it, you could come to the variance and say that, well, we should be allowed to build because the other would allow us to do so? Wouldn't those be equal arguments?
We did address that with staff, and we're told the staff would not approve a variance or would not support a variance request of that nature. Our rezone to neighborhood commercial is currently on hold because we actually think this would be a much less impactful way of getting what the church wants, which is the sign. That's the whole reason they were doing the neighborhood commercial, as opposed to if you get the neighborhood commercial and then you look long-term down the road, if the church ever were to sell the property or something like that, then you've got a neighborhood commercial that could come in there with that. So it would be less intensive of a use to leave the zoning as is and simply grant the variance for a sign than to do the whole neighborhood commercial. Plus, it also would protect the church's current entitlements that it has, that it really doesn't want to give up.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
But that does raise another question. When you say that the development that's already approved, what do you mean by approved? Because if it's already permitted, wouldn't that be entitled regardless of whether you change the zoning?
No, it's my understanding it's approved under the current zoning. And so if the zoning of the property were changed, we would have to fall under the requirements of the zoning code that is in that particular.
Right, unless it's already been approved. I mean, if it's,
But I think the problem is, and you may be thinking about a grandfathering kind of idea or concept.
right.
Yeah, you want to?
Yeah. In 2007, when the approval for building the existing church structure was put on the property, there was a growth plan that was supposed to be started in 2011. The permit was issued for the main building, but we were going to have to go back and permit all of the other buildings. So there's not an
So that's not approved. That's
there's
your
not an
plan.
existing permit, but it is part of the master plan that was approved with the original building.
Okay.
Does that make
answers-
sense?
That answers the
Okay.
question. So no, there wouldn't be grandfathering, which is what
Correct.
the issue is.
Yeah. It wouldn't be grandfathered in because it hasn't been built yet.
Okay, thank you. I have two comments here, and unless, first I'll wait and see.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, please, I was going to say I was going to go online. So yes, Board Member Gage, please go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
In the original master plan, was the date to have built out all of the buildings sooner than now? Because if the plan was to say have been built out prior to, 2013, and just so when the surrounding area is built out, you would have a bigger structure. But that's not what happened. So now you guys are set back very far without the bigger presence towards the street, and everything else has kind of engulfed you. Is that what happened? Like, the original building is so small and so far back. I'm assuming the plan was to grow towards the front and maybe sooner than, where we are at right now.
Yeah, the original plan was this building was to be built as a youth center on the property, not as the main church facility, but temporarily it was going to be used as the main church facility. And this was in 2007, occupancy in 2008. And as part of the plan, we were required to put in our future design of what we were going to do and an approximate start date, which was planned around 2011. About 2011, there started to be a change in the leadership at the church, and by 2014, there was a pastoral change, which is when my wife and I came in as the senior pastors of the church in 2014. From 2011 to 2014, not to go real deep into it, the congregation size dropped dramatically. And so those plans, in order to build the gymnasium, the kitchens, the classrooms, and the new sanctuary, all were not completed. And so, we know that at any time that we want to address that issue, we were going to have to go back through a permit process in order for whatever the new design would look like in today's structure. But so that's the history on that. I hope that answers your question.
What are your current plans to build out that property? Do you have a date in mind?
No, we would like to have already done that, but we're not in a position. COVID didn't help things at all, but our hope is the next thing we will be able to build is a gymnasium that we can utilize for the community, and then hopefully at some point for our Christian school and so forth. But, you know, the design will depend, you know, obviously on church revenues and church growth over the coming years.
Right, thank you. So in the future, the building would be larger. You're asking for a bigger sign on the street right now. But in the future, the building will be on the street, which means you wouldn't need the larger sign at that time so people could see you when they were driving by, because the buildings would be there, right? Am I understanding this correctly?
Well, no, we would still want the larger sign, not unlike what is just east of us at the storage unit, so that we can communicate to the community what events were going on.
Okay.
The taller sign gives us the ability to have the illuminated sign be changed when we have a guest speaker or different event at the church or different fundraiser going at the church. The building will probably never be at the road. In fact, the original drawings has parking lot from the road up to about where you see the SF8 yellow on the presentation, and then the building laying west to east, and then the gymnasium just south of that. I mean, that's about as rough as I can tell you kind of in this presentation. But the building would never be right up on the road, but we would still want to keep the aesthetics of the property with, you know, the bougainvilleas and the ground growth and the trees. And we would like a sign that breaches the top of those things, so that we can still communicate to the community the activities that we have going on.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Chairman,
Yes.
so I have two questions. And
Yes,
I think
Board
they're
Member Simon, go
procedural.
ahead.
It might be for Samantha. First question that I have is, currently the way that the zoning is, my understanding is that they're approved, or they could be approved for four signs, 3 along Warner, and then 1 additional. If this was overturned and it was approved, they're looking for 1 sign, or would this still allow them 4 signs?
Board Member Simon, that condition would be up to the board to flesh out. And as the condition is stated, it is my understanding that the other monument signs, as is permitted by right, would go away, and there would just be 1 monument sign along
Okay.
Warner. So no other signs on Warner or Claiborne.
Okay. And then procedurally, it's my understanding that we have 4 findings of fact that need to be addressed. And if any one of those 4 findings of fact is found to be untrue, then procedurally, as a body, we have the ability to deny. I don't know.
Board Member Simon, I believe all 4 findings need to be met. That is
Correct.
how
Okay.
the LDC is written.
Okay. And then I just have one statement, and this has to do with the landscaping and the current monument sign, or the ability to build monument signs. I mean, there's monument signs all over the town. Landscaping, I think, can be met with regards to what the town requirements are, and still allow for sight of monument signs at current size. So that's just a comment I have, but that's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Simon. And I actually have one as a follow-up for the applicant. In the review, you went through all of the other church properties and showed how they are not congruent with this property, and hence, you know, the variance should be allowed. But I didn't see you present any that actually are like this property. So are you aware of any that are in this situation where they were granted this type of a variance?
No, I am not. What I was going off of was were the 9 church properties that were identified in the staff report. Those, it's my understanding, those are the 9 churches that are in residential zones like this church. So other churches in the town would be in different zoning jurisdictions, not residential. So maybe mixed use or some sort of commercial or something like that. So if you're looking at comparisons, those 9 churches in residential zones are the comparisons. They are the similar properties. But what I wanted to highlight was why those properties don't have a variance or don't have the sign is because they're fundamentally different than this particular property, which is what I think the board has to look at, is these physical characteristics of this property.
Understood. I just wanted to be sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. If there's no more, I have 2 comment cards, and we can always come back to some additional discussion following this, but I want to call them up. We have David Wilkins is opposed to the item and wishes to speak. Please come up, state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you for hearing me. My name is David Wilkins, and I live at one of the properties just adjacent to the church there, the closest property to the church property, and I represent my 2 neighbors, who are the other 2 that are closest to the sign. And I don't have a lot of flowery words or anything. I would just like to say I support the decision of the zoning hearing officer to deny the sign. It would significantly impact our view and the aesthetic appeal of our neighborhood, which I would be opposed to. I have a presentation very quickly here. Can we go to the next slide here? Here's the reasons that I'm opposed to the sign here, and I'm not going to read them to you. You can take a second here to read them. I realize I only have 3 minutes, so I'll go very quickly. Next, please. Okay, so you can see from my backyard, this is the sign there. If that sign were to grow to 12 feet and 64 square feet and be a lighted changing message sign, you could see what I'd be subject to both day and night, as well as my neighbors. Next slide, please. These are from the other direction. These houses are actually to the west. We would all have a view of that. I would imagine that most people in this room would probably not be in favor of that being in their backyard and having that going 24 hours a day. Next, please. The proposed plan, this is just a view from the west and kind of shows the flavor of our neighborhood. It's simply, that kind of sign does not reflect the character of our neighborhood. Obviously, it would be a detriment from my perspective, and I think from yours as well. You can see on the right-hand side there, Rancho Corona sign. That's kind of the signs that we have. There's a Morrison Ranch sign that's similar to that as well. Next, please. I believe that the sign, this maybe isn't my call, but, you know, as you drive across, there's some very large signs there, which I really don't know whether they fit the zoning requirements right now or not. There was a storage container there that the signage is very large. I would like to take just a second here to say, however, that the 3 major arguments, the premise of the 3 major arguments from council here, I believe are in error, either factually or logically. The one error, the argument, was that the church was there first and that the town kind of grew up around it. That is not true. This neighborhood that you're looking at, where those 3 houses were my house was built in 2000, whereas the church, the proposal was 2007, it was built in 2008. And that's coming from the west, so if you're driving down the road, you would see our houses first, including a 5 to 6 foot wall that goes around the neighborhood. So the church was set back after that was built, so to me that is not a valid argument. Secondly, we talked about, there was some mention of the neighborhood commercial zoning if kind of thing. That was never approved. In fact, council mentioned that there was already hearings on this and neighborhood input, and I've lived there during that, and we never were even notified of that. And quite frankly, I am horrified that neighborhood commercial would be zoning right outside my back door there. And so are my neighbors, one of whom is a real estate agent who just said that would significantly impact the value of our property, as would this sign. I'm not so much worried about that. I didn't buy my property as an investment. I bought it to live there, and I would like to live there peacefully with the church as well. And I support our community of churches, but I think this request is just a little too big. Next, please. I think I just mentioned that right there. The last thing is that, 20.
You can finish, sir.
I'll go quickly here. The last argument, major argument that I heard was that the storage, the neighborhood commercial, no, it's general commercial property is adjacent to the church, which is true. And we're quite frankly, from a neighborhood perspective on the other side, we're glad it's over there. We don't want it any closer. And if the sign was, 10 foot closer to that property, it would be the same as the others. we want it as far away from possible. We don't want to live in Las Vegas with the lights and things. I did not hear that the church would be willing to put the sign over there, just that it could be put there. As it is, that's about 75 to 100 yards away from where the sign is now, which is only about maybe 60 or 70 feet from our properties from where we live. So we want it as far away from possible as possible, and we think there's a good reason for the zoning, and we're thankful for it. We're thankful to this board as well. Next slide, please. This is the last one that I have. And again, we have the zoning for good reason, in my view. It's to protect us from situations like this, and we'd like to keep a nice, appealing neighborhood. And I really hope that my grandkids and I and my wife and my children who live in the area and we're enjoying our pool or our backyard don't have to look at that. Again, I support our community of churches, but this is, I think, unreasonable. Thank you very much. Any
Thank you,
questions?
sir.
Chair, I love a lot of people who just keep driving right on past their 3 minutes. It's like someone hit them with a bat when that bell.
The bell is a new accoutrement here, so it was.
Great reaction.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wilkins. Next up, we have Devin Kling, and he is opposed to the item, or she, oh my gosh. She is opposed. She didn't click, but you do want to speak?
Yes.
Okay, please state your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
I am Devin Kling. I live in Morrison Ranch, directly across from the church. If you recall the last picture we saw, that literally looks like it was taken from right in front of my house. So that's the view I currently have of the church. Never been a fan of the creative signage on the shipping container that's been there for at least 6 years. But I did want to address some of the items that Mr. Stanley spoke
I'm sorry,
about.
Chair.
Yes.
Could you ever speak into the mic? We
Yeah,
can't
pull the
hear them.
microphone down, please. Thank you.
Is that better? Oh, I can already hear it's better.
Thank you.
So my first thing I want to bring up is they already have an allowance for a larger sign. I know that they discussed that if they had a larger sign with the foliage requirements, which it doesn't look like all of the foliage is purposeful foliage, but that it would be harder to see without it being an extra 12 feet in the air. But I do believe the photos we saw earlier do show that a larger sign would certainly be visible. I appreciate that they currently have very neutral colors there, so it's not really an eyesore, but they can certainly go bigger and still be quite visible. Actually, I think that was kind of the main points I wanted to make, that, you know, if they're not already utilizing the allowances they have, why should they be asking for a variance for more? That's it.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kling. Okay, I'd like to give the applicant a moment if they would like to follow up on any of those comments.
I think the only comment that we would make, it would be in regard to some comments made by Mr. Wilkins. You know, we are certainly, and we'll reiterate our commitment here, which I've done more than once on the record, that we want to locate, if we're allowed this variance and have the sign, the church wants to locate it in a way that is the least intrusive to the surrounding properties, and so moving it further down toward the GC property is certainly something that the church is willing to do and willing to be there for. There was one question, and I just wanted to clarify. The church is willing to give up the 4 monument signs and for the 1 freestanding monument sign we're asking for today. I just wanted to make that clear. I think one of the board members had a question about that, and I wanted to make that just certain on the record, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pastor, you have one. Please go ahead.
I've heard in the original hearing and here today about how the church isn't utilizing the 4 signs that it currently can have. A big issue with that is I think we'd be more offensive. I mean, if the 1 sign is an issue at 5 feet high, how much more offensive would it be to the community to have 3 signs right around that corner at 8 feet high? That doesn't make any sense at all, which I think to, Mr. Stanley's point is we could move a bigger sign and try to, make this as least impactful on everybody. I think 4 signs, 8 foot high with LED images on them would make it look more like Vegas than one more conservative sign for the whole property. So I think that, again, we're trying to come up with a solution that is the least amount of impact and still accomplish what it is that we want to do. So.
All right, thank you, sir.
Chairman,
Yes.
we do have outside counsel Andrew McGuire here who would also like to speak.
Okay, please, Mr. McGuire, please come on up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I won't take much of your time because your staff does an excellent job. Just a couple things to keep in mind in terms of variances granted. They are not granted personally to the user of the property today. They are a property right that runs with the land, so that any user could petition to use this if it were within their rights for the use on the property. So you may see future uses that are on this property that aren't the current ones that would take advantage of the same variance. So it's important to keep that in mind, that it's not specific. It's not like a conditional use permit where you can condition it upon the specific user on the site. Part 2 of that is that the Arizona Court of Appeals has addressed an issue similar to this and has, in the context of a car dealership, wanting to have a sign variance because of the choice of having multiple car dealers or car brands that were allowed on the sign, and the requirements from the brands on how much space they had to have on the sign and how big the sign had to be. The court focused very clearly on the choice of the dealership to have multiple brands, much like we have here of the choice of the position of the original building, because that really is what's driving the bus here. This is not a choice of the neighborhood. It's not there's nothing unique about the road being a different size than it was now. I mean, Warner Road, everybody knew it was going to be a big road. The positioning of the building is what's causing the visibility issue. It's not necessarily a unique characteristic of the site. It's the choices made on the site. And so I just wanted to make sure that we focused on a couple of those issues, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, sir. The board members have questions. Online, either of you two?
No questions.
None from me, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, then. With that being said, did you want to say one? Yes, sir, go ahead. If you could turn the mic on, state your name again.
Mr. Chair, Scott Whitwam, pastor for Valor Christian Center. In regards to what outside counsel stated, I do want to be clear that even if we took the zoning to NC or a variance was granted by the board, our property has a deed restriction for church use. And so it wouldn't be that if you granted this variance that you're going to expect a neighborhood Target or Walmart to show up or a Circle K. The property has a deed restriction for church or Christian school, those type of activities. So it wouldn't be just an open use if we did convey the property to some other organization.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, then if no more questions, I'll close the public hearing and we'll bring it up to the dais for discussion and/or a motion. Any discussion? Board Member Bianchi, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess based on what's been presented and stated tonight, I think what we've all found is there are signage options still available to the applicant, whether they choose to take advantage of those or not. We've also seen that there's been examples that have been documented with similar type uses in similar type zoning districts around the town that are still within town code and the LDC and the sign code. What's concerning to me is I don't want to be setting a precedent approving a variance for a sign of potentially this size and magnitude in a residential district. I worry about that precedent. So to me, the findings haven't been met for me to reverse course on the variance, and for those reasons, I would most likely uphold the decision of the zoning hearing officer.
Thank you, Board Member Bianchi. Anyone else? Board Member Johnson, please go ahead.
Chairman, I concur with Board Member Bianchi. It's very important we not set precedents or open the door in the future for future variance cases like this. So I'm going to also concur with the staff report for denial. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, Board Member Fay.
Thank you. I'm less concerned with precedent. I don't have a problem saying if we don't like something, we made a mistake in the future. But, and I do really appreciate the job Mr. Stanley did, both with his approach, his demeanor, and making the best he could out of what he had. Unfortunately, I think he didn't really have a lot to work with on this case. I think this probably fails all four components. The irregularity, I'm sorry, it is hard to find a less irregular parcel. I don't know that, I think it would be difficult in the town of Gilbert to find a less irregular parcel. And he described a Hobson choice of having to either have the sign or give up the zoning entitlements. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a Hobson choice. I think it's a choice. I think what actually the applicant wants is to be able to pick the best of the different without the limitations, and I think that those limitations exist for a reason. Again, we've addressed, some of the people have addressed how that this is to the extent there is a difficulty, and I don't really even think there is an irregularity, but to the extent there is one, it's entirely driven, in my opinion, by the applicant's actions. The similarly situated, I do appreciate, when I was in law school, everything, well, it's different. It depends, and, well, it's a different case, but I don't find the significance or the differentiators that Mr. Stanley pointed to are relevant. In fact, I find that the other churches are actually very relevant examples. And finally, I think I don't know that there is another side to this, but I think staff, if they were actively advocating more, the impact to the neighbors, I think, is actually quite substantial. I think Mr. Wilkins did a very good job of highlight. I mean, I was thinking this way anyway, but putting up the current streetscape, and it's unfortunate. Morrison Ranch, the Morrison brothers have a history of. This is weird to say. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the applicant. Morrison brothers have, in my opinion, a history or a trend of doing really nice streetscape, which creates a very nice residential impression and creates an impression that would be particularly offended, I think, by this sign. So looking at this, not even giving deference to the hearing officer, but even if I'm looking at this anew, I believe that this particular application fails all four pieces of the four-part test.
Thank you, Board Member Fay. Online, Board Member Simon or Gage, would you like to add anything?
I have nothing to add.
I would just like to add that I would agree with Board Member Fay that I feel this does fail all four, and I would move to uphold the denial. So there's your motion if it works.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Well, I'll just speak for a moment and then we'll get to that motion. But I also am in agreement. I find it to be, it is a bit unfortunate, but also I don't feel as though that this is not a choice. This is a choice, and I understand that saying the future viability and profitability of a piece of land could be affected, but that doesn't particularly meet the four criteria of it not being implicitly a choice. I don't think in any way does my disagreement with this diminish the value that the church has on the community, and I very much appreciate all of the hard work that they do with the youth and the veterans and everything else. But I also find that the four criteria have not been met, and would be in favor of upholding. So With that, I'll wait for a motion if one would be made.
I think we have a
I'll go
motion.
ahead. I'll go ahead and reiterate the motion. I move to uphold the denial decision of the zoning hearing officer.
Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Simon. Do I have a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Second by Board Member Johnson. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll go to a vote, and because we have online members, they will be voting vocally, and we will be utilizing the button system here. And Eva, will you call those out for them, or should I? Hold on, Commissioner Johnson, it's not up yet.
Well, pushing.
No, it's not up yet, sir.
You may now vote.
Okay, just to be, a vote in favor is a vote in favor of the motion to uphold the hearing officer. A vote negative is against the motion to disagree with the hearing officer.
Overturn.
Chairman, board member, a vote in favor is to uphold the denial.
Got it.
Correct.
We have 4 votes electronically. One moment. We will have to take 2 vocal. Chairman Gage,
I vote in favor.
Chairman Simon,
And I vote in favor.
and the motion carries by a vote of 6-0 to uphold the zoning hearing officer's denial.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody coming out, as well as the community coming out to discuss this matter. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Chairman, we would like